Thrilled to be in partnership with Gordon Conwell, as you saw, with Scott Sundquist and his team, specifically focusing on the theological side of things. All right, let me pray to kick us back off. Jesus, we invite you back into this conversation and into this room. Lord, you promised that you would never leave us or forsake us. We embrace that you are here and that your Spirit is with us. Lord, what a responsibility and what a joy that you've given us to steward well your kingdom. You've given each of us a small vineyard, some not so small. But Lord, these vineyards are yours. And in our very short time that we have on this earth, that we have breath in our lungs, we want to serve you well and faithfully, and we want to hear you say, good and faithful servant. Lord, that we would leave a generation, a legacy, a future for those who come behind us. Lord, give us courage, give us wisdom. Amen. All right, so Christian Halls International. I've told you about kind of our situation, our past, where we are now, some of the opportunities that we face, the challenges that we face. And at Christian Halls International, we're trying to press into this work. So in this final session, I'm going to present a model for education that learns from this past, that responds to our present, but that will require us to work together to reshape higher education across North Texas, North America, and the world. So first of all, what is a Christian hall? Nobody even knows what that is. I made it up. It's a word that shouldn't probably exist in the English language, but we did make it up. And it really comes out of my experience in my doctoral studies. I remember very clearly that first morning, arriving, we had flown all night long. Liam, my eldest, was 10 weeks. Laura Lee's ignoring me, otherwise I'd fact check here. 10 weeks old. We show up at this little 400 square foot flat in Summertown, North Oxford, surrounded by boxes. And Laura Lee kindly, she's always very kind, but insistently said, maybe you should go and visit the university now, Nick, and let me clean up. So then I left Summertown, walked down toward the university, and spent the next 2 hours looking for the University of Oxford. Couldn't figure out, where is this University of Oxford? I had no idea. I thought I was attending the University of Oxford. Finally, I stopped somebody, this kind old lady in the street, and said, could you tell me where the University of Oxford is? And she looked at me and said, are you American? That's all. If you know anything about British culture, that's all she needed to say. Are you American? Like, well, are you part of a college? I was like, well, yeah. Something about like a Wycliffe Hall. I said, oh, so you're a graduate seminary, and yes, it's right down the road. The reason is because Oxford is actually this group of 55 or so colleges and private halls, each of them self-standing, but under the umbrella of the University of Oxford. And I remember that first lecture, John might have been walking in with black sub-fusk flowing gowns, kind of walking in and giving his 2-hour lecture, and then turning and walking off, and that's the sum total of my experience with the university professor. Black gowns flowing, entering and exiting lecture halls. But it was with Marcus Bachmuel, my supervisor in college, having tutorials at C.S. Lewis's old offices, one-on-one, one-on-three, one-on-four, that Socratic discussion, small group formation. That's where my soul was formed, in college. Sitting with John Lennox over lunch and discussing science and religion, and sitting with Tom Wright, talking about theology. That's where I was shaped and formed as a person. And so despite having a massive university as the kind of substructure, formation took place in small groups. And I saw that model. And at the time, I was working for an organization that was doing great work, the Emmanuel Foundation, really focusing on producing content in Christian formation. And we were doing some great work of creating curriculum, creating content, and pushing it out to our different communities. But word began to come back from our field that we were having at times a corrosive effect on local talent, because by going directly to the student, by going directly to the consumer, we were circumventing any role for local mentorship, local tutorial, local pastoral care. Well, that's not what we wanted to do. That wasn't the point. We were trying to solve one problem, and in the process, another problem emerged. And so Christian Halls International was birthed out of this desire to find, support, and elevate local mentorship and the tutorial model in local communities. Not to avoid any kind of university accreditation, not to go create our own universities, but rather to localize and centralize the core human formational experience in a very human space, in the formation of a soul. And so we are a tutorial-driven program. What Christian Halls International is, we do not own local campuses. We don't own local operations. We're primarily an advocacy organization that's trying to find, inspire, and resource local mentors and tutors to take on this mantle of authority that's been given to them by the Lord and say, I'm going to be responsible for the formation of the people in my sphere of influence. Now, everybody has different spheres. You could have a business, you could have a family, you could have a church. Different people have different spheres of influence. But for those people to recognize you do have a sphere of influence, and how do you begin to govern that sphere of influence in the formation of the people around you? And so what are we at Christian Halls International? Well, first I'll tell you what we are, and then I'll tell you why we do it. First of all, we are local fellowships of students. Small as 3, large as 300 at times. But we're local fellowship of students that are, secondly, mentored and tutored by a local subject matter expert. That's really the core component, is that you have local tutorials taking place with a subject matter expert that has experience and a passion for their area of study, that is overseeing a small tutorial group. We can call this, and this is done in a blended educational manner. Amanda Forbes writes about the need for blended education, citing Benjamin Bloom in '84, who did a study on that average tutored students scored above 98% of students in a conventional classroom setting. Just kind of across the board, every possible different area. The average tutored student scored above 98% of students in a conventional classroom setting. But while full tutorial instruction can be cost prohibitive, so we can't find enough one-on-one professors and enough PhDs to do one-on-one direct instruction, the blended university tutor model offers us a model that's radically affordable, but also deeply formative. And so that interchange between the university professor, John Muddyman, walking in with his gowns, kind of giving data transfer, content dumping, with a formational space with a Marcus Bachmiel who can say, all right, this is what we're going to write on. Here's the essay that we're going to address. Here's the question that we're going to answer together. Let's go write on this, research on this. Come back next week. Write me 5,000 words. Let's read it together and sharpen each other. And only then would we submit our work back to the university. That blended experience between university and college, professor and tutor, is a model that's a very old model, a very effective model. So we have the fellowships of students with a local tutor or fellow. In our vocabulary, a tutor is basically a subject matter expert. A fellow is somebody that we elevate as a trusted spiritual mentor as well as a subject matter expert. So the matching between local groups of students and a subject matter expert attached to an accredited university. This could be an accredited institution. So we're kind of blending that old monastic model of local students and subject matter experts with the quality control, that impulse to kind of ensure that there is quality and it's not going crazy and off the rails. We're bringing those together and saying there is a role for the university. We're not trying to undermine Christ-centered universities. We're trying to expand and elevate their influence by giving governance back to the local community of care. Now, I've had university professors tell me, we couldn't do that. We know those parents. Those whiny, consumerist parents that we get calls every day. Yeah. Okay, and it's true. Sometimes parents can be a little whiny. However, that's because many of them have this consumerist attitude of, I've given my kids to you, I want them to take this class, and why did you give them a B? That's consumerism and abdication of responsibility. That's not governance. That's not proper governance. And so we find great institutions. And we took this Oxford model, and I knew early on there was no way that I could go to the communities that were calling me, to Brazil, to Uganda, to other international locations. I couldn't go build hundreds of universities. We didn't have the capital, we didn't have the people, we didn't have the wherewithal. And frankly, we didn't want to cause more damage of creating institutions that would suck in enormous amounts of capital and then fall. We knew that wasn't the model. But I knew I could replicate that college experience. I knew that I could find subject matter experts like my dad sitting in North Brazil, who'd given his life to theological education and had 20 students at his feet any given year. I knew I could find those people. And I knew I had a historic model that this has worked for 1,700 years. It's not like this is new. I'm not a genius. I just read a lot of old books. And so I began to go to some different universities and say, you've invested enormous amount of money into creating an online curriculum. The rise of online education has kind of swept the world. There's a lot of good that can come out of it, access. Not as much cost control as we thought there would be. Costs have continued to rise, but certainly access to data is no longer a problem. However, I've had schools that have dumped 10, 12, 20% of their endowment into creating an online school, only to find out that in the world of business, content may be king, but distribution's queen, and she wears the pants, baby. If you don't have distribution, you don't have anything. Only to find that Purdue Global is dumping $70 million a year into online marketing. And the University of North Carolina is putting $20 million a year into marketing its business school. And these small colleges, thinking that they would somehow have hundreds of thousands of students, have no ability of actually going to market. And so we begin to meet with them and say, what would it look like if you do what you do well? Content creation, accreditation, logistics, those kinds of things. Let us what we do well, which is community investment, finding local tutors, finding local mentors, building those communities of faith. All it will take you to do is let governance go back to the local community. And that was a hard ask. But the problem was, and frankly the blessing was, that the market was pushing them towards this kind of solution because they couldn't compete. And so LeTourneau University, one of our first vendors and very close aligned partner, came to us and said, we want to be your polytechnic solution. We're great at engineering, aviation, polytechnic, computer science. That's our sweet spot. We've got 60 years of amazing material, amazing content, intellectual property, and we don't want to be an online school. Our professors don't want to be an online school because we know that what we do is hands-on. But we're a destination. We can only call so many people to come to Longview, Texas. What does it look like to create a distributed network of polytechnic students around the country and around the world, formed and shaped in a Christ-centered worldview? And so they signed. I couldn't believe it. They signed and they said, let's go do this together. And so we said, great, you produce the content, we're going to go find the students. But because we're going to be investing the time and energy and capital and resources into go finding these markets and opening up these communities, we want two things. We want to be able to control price, to be non-debt, pay as you go, targeted to local purchasing power, because we know a South Brazil is different than a South Texas, which is different than South Bozeman. Three very, very different markets and communities. We want to be able to find those people, recognize the affinity group within which they've been based, find the people that are going to love and invest and mentor those communities. And because we're going to do that, we want to be able to set price, and we want to return a significant percentage of the tuition to go back and reinvest in that local community. Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to have to charge people tuition to the university and then upcharge to cover costs of the actual people who are doing the soul formation on the ground. And built a business relationship with these universities that allows us to go into communities from Brazil to Uganda to all across North America in a way that's sustainable. So LeTourneau University came on as a polytechnic. King's College came on quite early, focusing on politics, philosophy, and economics. We know that the formation of leaders in our communities is critical. We cannot just abdicate the space of civic governance. God calls us to be engaged in the flourishing of our cities. Aaron Pierce, my COO, has invested multiple degrees, multiple master's degrees, and a tremendous amount of his life in forming of good civic entities and civic communities. What does it look like to begin to shape and influence our spaces from a God-centered perspective? So King's College, New York came on for politics, philosophy, and economics. Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary then came on as a theological seminary, because everything that we're doing is biblical and theological. We wanted quality institutions and seminaries to speak into these different communities, not just for high school students and college students, but for parents and pastors, people who are saying, I want to take back governance of the biblical and theological space of my community. What we don't want is we don't want kids to have to sit online for 7 years getting undergraduate in theology and Bible, undergraduate, graduate theology and biblical studies, and then 7 years later pop up and say, hey, I'm here, somebody hire me to be a pastor. And everyone says, where have you been and who are you and why would we trust you with our flock? So how do we find those people, mentor them, tutor them, invest in them, deploy them into our communities of care, and then eventually say, yes, this person has earned the right to be given the responsibility of formation. Dallas International University, right down the road, I've known them for years and years as SIL, Summer Institute of Linguistics, focused much of my language studies and what they were doing. And then we began to talk and meet about how can we use their programs for international missions, culture, language, theology, as we deploy these people out into the international space. Indiana Wesleyan, Southeastern University, more and more people begin to come on board because, as a good friend of mine says, who worked in the entertainment space, nobody wants you till somebody wants you, and then everybody wants you. And so suddenly we found that supply side was not the problem anymore. Plenty of programs, plenty of products. We've got about 150 degree programs from dual credit, undergraduate, master's, and doctorate. And so suddenly we're sitting here with this wealth of resources, this wealth of degree programs. LeTourneau University, as of last month, has agreed to charter a trade school for licensure in welding and plumbing and kind of all the great skilled trades. And so the ability of somebody coming through a high school program and walking with a diploma and an Associates of Arts and a licensure in plumbing with no debt, ready to go take a $70,000 job, fully formed as a soul. Suddenly we've got all the resources, but then what do you do with all these resources? So supply side was solved. Now how do we begin to push into the demand side? So if we are a local community of students mentored by a local subject matter expert, attached to a certified program, an academic program, fourthly, we design to meet the needs of your local community with a design and implementation process that we collapse down into about 8 weeks, so that in 8 weeks we can go into a community, we can design, figure out what the assets are, what are the needs, and deploy the right kind of program to that local community. That's why our focus is on the local community as the client and our schools as our vendors. That's a very, very important distinction, because the power for too long has sat with nameless, faceless institutions. My cousin goes off to a state school, lovely young man, loves the Lord, and 6 years comes back with a different pronoun. Who do I hold accountable? Do I write a letter to the president and say, I'm never going to send you money? The power for too long has been in one direction. And what our promise to our local clients are is that we'll find the very, very best faithful institutions that are ready to invest their lives in forming great content and curriculum and accreditation and degree programs. But should they neglect their stewardship, we're going to fire them. We'll fire them because ultimately the local community is the space where this takes place. It is the space where the soul is formed. And so designed to meet your local community, we recognize, so I'm a culture junkie. If you cut me into three pieces, I'm this weird mixture of international and missional by blood and legacy, academic by formation, and I like to say entrepreneurial by divine cursing. I can't look at problems without trying to solve those problems. But that's packaged into this kind of cross-cultural thing that's happened when my parents ripped us out of the Montana and Nebraska farming communities and sent us to Brazil. And ever since, I've been fascinated by culture and community. And I know that a Hispanic community in Southwest Texas focused on entrepreneurship is a different community than someone sitting in Southlake or Richland Hills focusing on finance. They're just different demographics. They're different people. They're different communities, much less if we're going to go to the American Indian Reservation in northern Montana. I'm not going to be able to walk onto that res without the person who's willing to give their life to that community. Nobody's there anymore. The church has left. Even the Catholics have left. Us evangelicals, we fled long ago, but even the Catholics have left. And when even the Catholics left, those last holders on to the Christian tradition, there's nobody left. And so how do I find the person on the res that is willing, who has lived on the res, will die on the res, and will give their life for that community? Who loves the strange, weird space that is military bases? I can't walk onto that base. I don't know that affinity group. That has to be a self-governed space. And so that's why the design process is so critical to us. We want to learn and design into the needs and assets of local communities and resource them to go about this work. We don't own or govern those spaces. They have to be self-governed. And as we've grown, this challenge has even gotten more challenging because you can feel the trappings of corruption and power lurking at the gates. And I think maybe a year ago, as I was talking with Aaron, we just had this vision of we have to take off the ring of power. I can't give it to anybody else because it'll corrupt them. How do we set it onto the table and gather around as a fellowship and say, how do we govern the space? How do we work together to avoid corruption, to avoid the trappings of power and money? Because we cannot serve God and mammon. And so how do we turn our attention together and serve each other to create and design solutions for local communities? And then fifthly, we're an organization that wants to move into this educational space without debt, that insidious driver of higher costs and financial slavery. Nehemiah 5, as Nehemiah continues to tell the story, he has looked and he's seen the walls. They've begun to build. They've stood up and they have they've rejected the both cynicism of the people who would reject them, and as we'll see, the violence that was attempted. But then he saw the problem of debt. He said, now there was a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish brothers, for there were those who said, we, our sons and our daughters are many, therefore let us get grain that we may eat and live. There are others who said, we have mortgaged our fields, our vineyards, and our houses, that we might get grain because of the famine. Also there were those who said, we have borrowed money for the king's tax on our fields and our vineyards. Now our flesh is like the flesh of our brothers, our children like their children. Yet behold, we are forcing our own sons and our daughters to be slaves. And some of our daughters are forced into bondage already, and we are helpless because our fields and vineyards belong to others. Then I was very angry when I heard their outcry and these words. I consulted with myself and contended with the nobles and the rulers and said to them, you are exacting usury, each from his own brother. How do we do this over and over in the church? That we subject ourselves and benefit from the bondage of our brothers. This cannot be. So how do we do this? Well, first of all, as I've said, we've had to partner with great institutions. But by taking over the governance and the responsibility of marketing and customer acquisition and student care and mentorship and tutorials, avoiding the need to go out and tap into federal loans, we can radically reduce the instructional costs through this hybrid professor-tutor model. We can localize the formational space, and we can avoid the infrastructure costs. I had somebody say to me last week, Nick, if I had known what you were doing, the $25 million that we had sent to Vanderbilt last December, we would have sent to your communities instead. We just didn't know. The impulse is to somehow dump resources, and then they disappear. How instead can we rechannel those resources for sustainable, flourishing communities? How do we use our local mentors to shape students into practitioners? So this is the vision. Local communities taking back the stewardship and responsibility to steward and cultivate the Christian intellectual tradition for the formation of godly, virtuous citizens from generation to generation. But as we've all learned, people don't buy vision, they buy products. And that's a challenge. I can sit here and tell you vision all day long, but unless there's something to do, something to be part of, it's hard to change the trajectory of our nation. So how do we take this to market? Well, let me give you some program examples of what we built. So first of all, dual credit. We started as a graduate theology program, because that was my whole area, right? Doctorate from Oxford in theology. I'm going to start a theology program. And then the people began to push us down into undergraduate and then down into dual credit. And it was actually here in Dallas-Fort Worth that people first began to say to me, the colleges and the community colleges have broken the barrier down into high school. So using dual credit to basically start to take over and colonize that space. And so we had homeschool after private school after co-op call us to say, we have a hard time keeping kids in 11th and 12th grade because why would they take 11th grade algebra if they can take it at the local community college? Why would they take sociology with us if they can take it from the local community college? You don't want your kids taking sociology at the local community college. I can tell you, you don't want it to happen. But people look at it and they say, but that's $900. It's $1,000, it's $2,000 I won't have to spend later in college. And so the barrier between college and high school has already become degraded and fuzzied by those looking to colonize into our spaces. So our response is a proactive, aggressive move to say, well then if you're going to do that and try to commodify and siphon off talent from our communities, well then I'm going to turn those communities, turn those schools into their own community colleges. We're going to layer in dual credit. We're going to layer in associate's degrees, non-debt, Christ-centered, quality dual credit programs into every single homeschool campus, private school, co-op university model in Texas. I want 300 Christian community college sites in the Dallas Metroplex in the next 3 years. That's the only way that we're going to be able to compete. If one group does it, it'll die on the vine. You won't get critical mass. But there are at least 300 campuses that can compete for the 300,000 people that are out there in our communities attending community college. We're not competing against TCU. We're not competing against A&M. We're not competing against UT. We're competing against Tarrant County Community College, Collin County Community College, Dallas County Community College. And we can compete against those schools. So first of all, dual credit is a product that we can roll out that leads to this concept that we're working with, which is a 13th and 14th grade extension of those communities. It is a strange and weird thing that happened in Prussia about 200 years ago, that a 12th grade suddenly symbols and declares the end of your sovereignty as a formational community. That the timer goes ding, 12th grade happens, they graduate, and the people who know and love those kids the most suddenly have no responsibility or ability or right to somehow shape and govern their formation. It's a weird, strange, insidious thing. And yet school after school that I meet with tells me, Susan's not ready. We know she's not ready. Her parents know she's not ready. But we don't know what to do. And we're going to send her to College Station. And everybody knew what was going to happen. Everybody knew it was going to happen, and nobody stopped it. And Susan was lost. Why have we somehow bought into the lie that the governance of the local community of faith was done just because she graduated from 12th grade? And so what we're doing is we're layering on this gap year, call it what you want, gap year, 12th grade, 13th, 14th grade experience that continues to be taught and mentored by the people who know and love Susan the most, that have been with Susan for 12 years. And she's the hero of those 10th grade and 11th grade kids that are coming in. And there's a tremendous community of care that's already been built up around the formation of this person. Why don't we take that and extend it for a couple years and take care of psychology, sociology, cultural anthropology, philosophy, English Comp, World Civ 1, World Civ 2, and retake that whole Gen Ed program? And so that's kind of our 13th and 14th grade program, is to basically say you should never have to go do a Gen Ed program somewhere else. We have plenty of people, plenty of mentors, plenty of tutors, and plenty of universities that you can happily get a very, very high quality Gen Ed or associate's program within a community of faith. Trade school, third program. I've already talked to you about my passion for trade schools. It's becoming an obsession for me. I couldn't believe it when LaTourneau University said, yeah, let's go incorporate a Christ Center trade school that is built to be deployable into hundreds of businesses around the country. This is transformative. I can't get my mind around the impact that we can have if we can begin to invest in the formation of our trades and craftsmen. I cannot overestimate the importance that we cultivate and evaluate the trades and crafts in our communities. And there's market for it. Kids want to do it. You know, Mattress Mac, ever heard his thing, down in Houston? Do you know he got so fed up with this thing? And he's a crazy dude, right? Didn't he bet like $8 million on the World Series last year or something crazy? Crazy dude. He got so fed up with this, he opened up a trade school in his factory in Houston, and day one had 2,300 applications. Because people know, like, I can't go into debt for a psych degree. That's over. What do I do? Mattress Mac can do it because, one, he's got a crazy name and people can do whatever, he can do whatever he wants. But there's nothing that keeps us from doing the same thing. So trade school, kind of getting our minds and our hearts around both the value, the honor, and the effectiveness of that ministry is something that we have to start leaning into. Local work-study programs are kind of tightly connected with this. A very close friend of mine runs a restaurant chain. We had amazing meetings with him this last week. And he came to us and said, our average turnover is 6 weeks. They don't tell us they're not going to show up. They just don't show up, and they take their apron with them when they leave. I want to turn this company into a virtuous formational space, and I don't know how to do it. Can you help us? And so we met with their organization, and just a marvelous vision of what it looks like to take a chicken chain, and turn it into a formational space. When I grew up, family in Montana and Nebraska, there was a role for us to go out as a 16-year-old and throw hay bales and shovel poop. That wasn't non-virtuous, that was virtuous. It was good to show up, pull a paycheck, show up at work and work hard. Now, if I was still doing that at 32, that might have been a problem. Like, that's not a terminal end degree pathway or a career pathway. But there's something virtuous about showing up, doing work, being paid for it, and learning what it means to be a functioning member of society. And I love the idea that somebody could come in to a restaurant chain, do 2 shifts a week as a high schooler, through dual credit, start clicking off 40, 60 credit hours of undergraduate, stick with that program long enough to finish their BA, possibly elevate into middle management. Maybe they jump out because they don't want to be in franchise management. Totally fine. They've learned something well. They have a career experience. They have a no-debt educational community within a Christian business community that is family-run. All a win. But then my friend said, but what if I could take and cherry pick off the quality talent and build in my middle management? What if we could pay for their MBA? What if they could give them a franchise? Because we have more stores than we have talent. And suddenly you can begin to see that one little sphere of governance can become I've got 2 kids now, can become this space of formation. It's not just a chicken sandwich, it's a shining chicken on a hill. That's what I said. A shining city on a hill built around a sphere of sovereignty that we can govern in. What are the other places like that? What are the HVAC companies? What are the banks? What are the construction companies? They can say, we govern this space. God's given us this little city, this little space that we have the right to govern in. What does it look like to turn that into a space that's not just a money-making proposition, but a soul-formational system? So work study becomes a really powerful tool in our tool belt. We have a fellows program for PP&E that we've talked about. Grabbing a group of students, we're talking with the governor of Montana about building up these local communities across rural areas of Montana for law and politics and philosophy, because they have no way of competing against the liberalism that's within University of Montana. What does it look like to take those spaces back and then deploy those students into city government and into the courts and into the state house? This is our space. We can govern this space. Honors colleges. We have a wonderful lady, Melissa King-Travis, down in the Woodlands, Texas. Went to Faulkner, so she was part of that kind of Oxford tutorial model. And her vision is to build a 2-year honors college, very similar to what Mark Woolsey's doing at the Worldview Studies Academy, where she can have those kids for 2 years. And they can come out with an associate's degree, basically exchange all of those gen ed courses for 10 classes, 30 credit hours, or 20 classes, 60 credit hours in the greats and worldview and in formation and in the great conversation. And in the process, learn about psychology and philosophy and economics and all these other kinds of things, but from within a Christian worldview. Teachers training. We've got to elevate and resource our local talent. What does it look like for somebody to come in who wants their master's degree, wants to be able to teach at a local campus, a local Christian hall, can start to take master's level classes and teach and create an entire ecosystem of formation within that local private school or that local homeschool co-op? Resources are not the problem. Imagination is the problem. Governance is the problem. And I can talk about many other programs, exchange programs. We have a campus in Brazil that is waiting with 17 beds, ready to take your students into an exchange program. You'd be more than welcome to come study in Brazil. We have wonderful relationships in Israel and Oxford and Italy. The community of faith is waiting to come in and say, let's build this together. Josh Lindblom, who's a pitcher for the Brewers, came to me about 1.5 years ago, and he said, I've got 4,000 minor league ball players running around in dusty buses all over Tulsa, and no way of getting them educated. Many were drafted out of high school. They're not going to make it. They're going to be in for 2 years. They don't know what they're going to do next. I said, it may sound weird to you, but that's my affinity group. I want it. Give it to me. I want to go govern that space. And so Josh Lindelof is taking and building a Major League Christian Hall with umpires and Major League ball players and minor league ball players, because he has the imagination to see this is the sphere that God has given me governance in. And if we can build something for minor league ball players, we can build something for tradesmen in North Texas. Programs are not sufficient, however. People are required. Nehemiah 7, now when the wall was rebuilt and I had set up the doors and the gatekeepers and the singers and the Levites were appointed, then I put Hanani, my brother, and Hananiah, the commander of the fortress, in charge of Jerusalem. For he was a faithful man and he feared God more than many. Then I said to them, do not let the gates of Jerusalem be opened until the sun is hot. While they are standing guard, let them shut and bolt the doors and appoint the guards with the inhabitants of Jerusalem, each at his own post and each in front of his own house. Now the city was large and spacious, but the people in it were few, and the houses were not built. So what happened? They came in and they rebuilt the walls. Now they had the structure of self-governance in place, but all the people were out living on their farms, and nobody was actually in Jerusalem. They had an empty city. They had to call people in and say, you need to be part of this. I know you may not want to live in town. I don't really want to live in town. I'd rather live in Montana. I like you guys, but I like Banff better. But come back to the city and take ownership of the governance of Judah. And so they had to call people in to both administration, Hanani, his brother, which he gave the governance of that town over because he was a faithful man and he feared God, but also inviting in the people to be part of the city. It's critical that we find those who are willing to take up the task, both in administration and leadership, and in the core work of rebuilding their own spheres. We need to bring people back into the conversation. What does it look like to offer a beautiful place, a well-designed place that actually effectuates the formation of our souls? We need these directors and administrators. So within the Christian halls, we have a number of roles that we call people to be part of. First of all, directors or administrators or champions, people who can come in and say, I'm an organizer. Frankly, our homeschool moms and our co-op directors are unbelievable at this, and the dads are pretty terrible. Moms have been saying, we've been doing this for 15 years. I've got a co-op that I've run for the last 15 years. My kids are graduating. What can I do? How do we give them a vision to take back governance of that space? Headmasters of school, how can we give them a vision to grab onto this and extend their influence beyond 12th grade through dual credit associates programs, and understand that they are not, by charter and by mission, they may limit themselves, but they are not inherently a high school. They are inherently a center of human formation. That is what a high school is. It may be limited by its leadership, and that's perfectly acceptable, but let you govern that decision, not some city administrator. That's a call for the community of faith. It's not a call for some alien structure pulled in from a past German vision of formation. Tutors, those with experience in leadership to lead Socratic discussions, to invest heavily in intellectual and spiritual formation. Professors, we're running out of professors. It's a shocking thing that on the one side, the industry is saying to us, don't go get your PhD. There's not enough jobs. Well, sure, if you want a tenure track at Harvard, there's not enough jobs. Leadership is the only thing that we are lacking. Finding instructors that are willing to say, yeah, I retired at 55 because I couldn't stand the institution any longer and I didn't want to sit in another faculty meeting. Even those of us in virtuous institutions know faculty meetings aren't great. And yet they're out there across our communities. How can we give them a role to come in and start to instruct and teach at scale? Business owners willing to provide work-study or apprenticeship spaces, even host families. Now, most of our students typically live with their families or live on their own, but there are times when we're finding students coming into an area because they want to be part of a community. What does it look like to provide a hospitable space for students? Churches. Churches are the largest waste of space in North America. It's just an objective fact. Churches sit empty 5 to 6 days a week. And in this area, in fact, the pastor of this church told me that in a 20-mile radius, there's over 1 million square feet sitting empty 6 days a week. We can redeem those spaces. Many of our churches are. We have one church that, I think it hosts 3 homeschool co-ops every week. So some are and some aren't. Patrons. It's amazing to me that when I go into a place like LaGrange, Texas, and I talk to 2 or 3 families that have lived there for 2 or 3 generations, they're looking around and saying, where are the virtuous youth? Where have they gone? Can we give them a vision for participating in the formation of those people? Maybe not as a teacher, maybe not as a mentor, maybe not as a director, but as a patron. So as a call to action, is change possible? Well, change happens every day. Positive change and negative change. When Steve Jobs was thinking through Apple, he had this vision for this non-supercomputing use of computation, and he wanted it to be deployed in wearables. This big vision, and began to carefully roll out different products: iPad, iPhone, iPod, Apple Watch. Those are kind of the products that have supported his vision and done it quite successfully. I think it's worth, what are they, $3 trillion or something now is the company. It's unbelievable. Karate schools I found were fascinating. As I was looking at different models of people who have done something. There were no karate schools in North America in 1940, 1950. There were a couple in San Francisco, but the expectation was that you would move back to the monastic community and practice in the dojo with your sensei. It was very much a spiritual formation as well as learning a martial art. Then Bruce Lee came around and was like, no, I want to expand this through North America, and they killed him for it. Not just kidding, that's a conspiracy. And then Karate Kid 1 and 2 happened, and suddenly it kind of captured everybody's imagination. And now you've got tens of thousands of karate schools and dojos all over North America, which didn't exist 60 years ago. So change happens all the time. The spread of Marxism and a subhuman ideology of what is the soul and what is the person has spread and captured our hearts and our minds. Change happens every day. We can do this together. The church can do this. So pastors, get your people to think missionally about being part of this. Headmasters, build something that retains the imprint and culture of your school, but extends your influence into a space that you're not currently working in. What would it look like to turn your high school in the evenings into a Hispanic language entrepreneurship program that's Christ-centered, that leads into the Hispanic community of North Texas in a way that's never been done before? Why aren't we doing that? 50% of our population. I don't know of a single accredited Christian Hispanic language program in North Texas. How is that possible? So it takes governance and it takes vision. Business leaders, open your business for apprenticeships. Parents, set expectations for what's actually valuable, for what's elevated, for what's prized, for what's good. And we can rebuild the rubble. Anthony Esolen says, there is no other option. No one's coming to save you. We can clear out the rubble of the fallen civilization. We need to, rather than scrounging among the pits of the ruins, as he talks about it. And first, we recognize that our civilization has fallen. That's okay. All civilizations fall. Don't be surprised. We can mourn, but that won't bring it back. We don't need to sit here wringing our hands. The state of the family is in shambles. It is. By any objective measure, The state of our families is in shambles. Natural law has been abandoned. Nowhere else is this more clear than questions of our sexuality. It's no longer a debate or a fight in our culture. The rampant sexuality, gender confusion, this is a symptom of a crumbled civilization and a culture of death. It's a culture of death. And are we willing to stand up among the rubble, begin to clear off the space and rebuild? This is going to require a number of responses. First of all, it's going to require embracing an alienation and an abandonment of a dying culture. It's going to require that we embrace an identity that's eternal, that's part of a great cloud of witnesses, that goes far beyond what we have today. Embrace that God is a God of creation, that we're created in his image, that we're called to build, to rebuild, as we have since the fall and the flood. Don't shrink from this call. Let's do this with good cheer and bold faith. There is, after all, no other option. Christ has called us to action for our children, for our own souls, and for the ongoing struggle for the fate of this world. To tap into, as C.S. Lewis calls it, the deeper magic that undergirds all these things. To find the song that God sang in creation. So let me close you with the following. This is a long little section from Nehemiah, but I'll let his words close us out. Now it came about that when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became furious and very angry, and he mocked the Jews. He spoke in the presence of his brothers and the wealthy men of Samaria, and he said, "What are those feeble Jews doing? Are they going to restore it for themselves? Can they offer sacrifices? Can they finish it in a day? Can they revive the stones from the dusty rubble, even the burnt ones?" Now Tobiah the Ammonite was near him. He said, "Even what they're building, if a fox should jump on it, he would break their stone walls down." Mocking and deriding. The start of how you undermine this kind of thing. Nehemiah said, "Hear, O God, how we are despised. Return their reproach on their own heads and give them up for plunder in a land of captivity. Do not forgive their iniquity. Let not their sin be blotted out before you, for they have demoralized the builders." So we built the wall, and the whole wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. Now when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the Ashdodites heard that the repair of the walls of Jerusalem went on, and that the breaches began to be closed, they were very angry. All of them conspired together to come and fight against Jerusalem, to cause a disturbance in it. But we prayed to our God, and because of them we set up a guard against them day and night. Derision moves to violence. Political, economic violence. We have to be ready to stand up and defend our most precious. And thus in Judah it is said, "The strength of the burden bearers is failing, yet there is much rubble. We ourselves are unable to rebuild the walls." Our enemies said, "They will not know or see us until we come. Kill them, put a stop to the work." When the Jews who lived near us then came and told us 10 times, "They will come up against you from every place where you turn. They're not going to let you get away with this." Then I stationed men in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, the exposed places, and I stationed the people in families with their swords, spears, and bows. When I saw their fear, I rose and spoke to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people. "Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. Fight for them." May the peace of Christ be with you. Thank you.